The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of downtown Phoenix as Marcus Rodriguez crouched behind an overturned delivery truck, his weathered hands gripping a modified crossbow. 3 months had passed since the outbreak began, and the once bustling metropolis had transformed into a graveyard of concrete and steel. The infected wandered aimlessly through the debris-strewn avenues, their grotesque moans echoing off empty buildings like a twisted symphony of the damned. Marcus had learned to read their patterns, understanding that the creatures were drawn to sound and movement, but their behavior remained unpredictable enough to keep even the most experienced survivors on edge. Behind him, a small group of fellow survivors huddled in the shadows, each one a testament to human resilience in the face of unimaginable horror. There was Elena Vasquez, a former emergency room nurse whose medical knowledge had saved countless lives during their desperate journey across the city. Her dark eyes held a steely determination that had never wavered, even when they'd lost half their original group to a horde that had cornered them in a shopping mall 2 weeks prior. Beside her sat Tommy Mitchell, barely 18 years old but already hardened by experiences that would have broken most adults. The kid had an uncanny ability to move silently through infected territory, a skill that had proven invaluable during their scavenging missions. The group's unofficial leader was Captain James Harrison, a retired Marine whose tactical expertise had kept them alive when lesser strategies would have led to certain death. His graying beard and scarred hands told stories of battles fought long before the world had gone to hell, but nothing in his military career had prepared him for the psychological warfare of fighting an enemy that felt no pain, no fear, and no mercy. Harrison studied the infected through a pair of cracked binoculars, counting their numbers and noting their positions with the methodical precision of a man who understood that one miscalculation could doom them all. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Intelligence gathered from other survivor groups suggested that a massive cache of military supplies lay hidden in the basement of the federal building 6 blocks away. The weapons and ammunition stored there could arm dozens of survivors and potentially turn the tide in their ongoing war against the infected. However, reaching the building meant crossing through the heart of what the survivors had dubbed the killing fields, a stretch of open ground where hundreds of infected congregated, drawn by some unknown force that seemed to emanate from the building itself. Marcus adjusted his position slightly, feeling the familiar weight of the tactical vest that Elena had salvaged from a fallen police officer. The vest bore the scars of their previous encounters, tears from infected claws and dark stains that served as grim reminders of how close they'd come to joining the ranks of the undead. Every piece of equipment they carried had been hard-won, taken from the bodies of those who hadn't been quick enough, smart enough, or lucky enough to survive the initial chaos of the outbreak. The infected below moved with the jerky, unnatural gait that had become sickeningly familiar to anyone who had survived this long. Their clothes hung in tatters, revealing flesh that had taken on a mottled gray-green hue, and their eyes had clouded over with a milky film that somehow made them even more terrifying. Some still bore the remnants of their former lives, a businessman's tie, a child's colorful backpack, a wedding ring that caught the sunlight as its wearer stumbled through the wreckage of civilization. Harrison lowered his binoculars and turned to address the group in a whisper that barely carried over the ambient sounds of the ruined city. His voice held the authority of a man accustomed to making life-and-death decisions, but there was also a weariness there that spoke to the toll this new world had taken on even the strongest among them. The plan he outlined was born from weeks of observation and careful analysis of infected behavior patterns, combined with hard-learned lessons about what worked and what led to disaster in this nightmarish landscape. Elena checked her medical supplies one final time, knowing that in the chaos to come, there would be no room for error. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she verified the contents of her makeshift field kit, bandages torn from clean clothing, antiseptic salvaged from abandoned pharmacies, and precious antibiotics that could mean the difference between life and death if someone was injured during the mission. She had seen too many good people die from infections that would have been easily treatable in the world that existed before, and she was determined not to lose anyone else to such preventable causes. Tommy's fingers traced the outline of the smoke grenades attached to his belt, each one a potential lifesaver if they needed to create a diversion or obscure their movements from the infected. The young man had developed an almost supernatural sense for reading the mood of a horde, understanding when they were agitated and when they might be caught off guard. His survival instincts had been honed by months of close calls and narrow escapes, transforming him from a frightened teenager into a valuable asset in their ongoing struggle against the infected masses that now ruled the streets of what had once been their home. The tension in the air was palpable as Harrison gave the signal to move, his weathered hand cutting through the morning haze in a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing to the small band of survivors. Marcus led the way, his crossbow raised and ready, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring as they began their descent from the relative safety of their elevated position. The infected below continued their aimless wandering, oblivious to the human presence that crept through the shadows above them, but Marcus knew that their apparent obliviousness was deceptive. One wrong step, one carelessly dislodged piece of debris, and the entire horde would turn toward them with the single-minded hunger that had consumed what remained of their humanity. Elena followed close behind, her medical bag secured tightly against her back to prevent any telltale rattling that might give away their position. She had learned to move with the fluid grace of a dancer, each footfall placed with deliberate precision on surfaces that wouldn't betray their presence to the creatures below. Her breathing was controlled and measured, a technique she had perfected during her years in the emergency room when staying calm under pressure meant the difference between saving a life and losing it. Now, that same composure served a different but equally vital purpose as they navigated through a world where panic was a luxury none of them could afford. Tommy brought up the rear, his youthful agility allowing him to move through the urban obstacle course with an ease that belied the mortal danger surrounding them. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, watching for signs of infected movement or potential escape routes should their carefully laid plans go awry. The teenager had developed an almost preternatural awareness of his environment, a survival skill that had emerged from the crucible of constant threat and had already saved their lives on more than one occasion when his sharp eyes had spotted danger that the others had missed. The first phase of their mission required them to reach a series of connected rooftops that would provide a clear path toward the federal building while keeping them above the main concentration of infected. Harrison had identified this route during their reconnaissance, noting that the buildings were close enough together to allow for relatively safe passage but far enough from the street level to avoid detection by all but the most observant of the creatures below. The plan relied heavily on timing and coordination, with each member of the team playing a crucial role in ensuring their collective survival. As they moved across the first rooftop, Marcus caught sight of something that made his blood run cold, a group of infected that appeared to be moving with more purpose than the mindless wandering they had come to expect. These creatures seemed to be following some kind of pattern, their movements coordinated in a way that suggested a level of organization that the survivors had never encountered before. He held up a closed fist, the universal signal for the team to freeze in place, and watched as the infected below moved through the streets with an efficiency that was both fascinating and terrifying. Elena crept forward to join Marcus at the edge of the rooftop, her medical training allowing her to observe the infected with a clinical detachment that helped her notice details others might miss. The creatures below showed signs of recent feeding, their clothes stained with fresh blood that hadn't yet had time to dry and darken. More disturbing still was the fact that they seemed to be moving in formation, with larger, more physically imposing infected taking point positions while smaller ones followed behind in what could only be described as a hunting pack formation. The implications of this discovery sent a chill through the entire team as they realized that their understanding of infected behavior might be fundamentally flawed. If the creatures were capable of learning, adapting, and organizing themselves into hunting groups, then every strategy they had developed for survival would need to be reconsidered. Harrison's military experience had taught him to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions, but this revelation challenged everything they thought they knew about their enemy and forced them to confront the possibility that the infected were evolving in ways that made them far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Tommy's sharp intake of breath drew their attention to another disturbing development. More groups of organized infected were emerging from side streets and alleyways, all moving toward the same general area where the survivors had planned to make their approach to the federal building. It was as if the creatures had somehow anticipated their mission and were positioning themselves to intercept any human activity in the area. The teenager's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his weapon, the reality of their situation beginning to sink in as he watched what appeared to be a coordinated response from creatures that were supposed to be mindless. The sound of breaking glass from somewhere behind them caused the entire team to spin around, weapons raised and hearts pounding as they searched for the source of the disturbance. What they saw defied explanation. A lone infected had somehow made its way onto the rooftop and was now standing between them and their planned escape route. The creature's appearance was different from the others they had encountered, its movements more fluid and its eyes showing a glimmer of intelligence that was deeply unsettling. It stood perfectly still, as if studying them, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, predator and prey regarded each other across the windswept rooftop. Marcus raised his crossbow, his finger hovering over the trigger as he tried to decide whether to take the shot or attempt to find another way past the creature. The infected's behavior was unlike anything they had encountered before. Instead of immediately attacking or alerting others to their presence, it simply watched them with an intensity that suggested it was learning from the encounter. Elena's medical knowledge told her that such behavior should be impossible given what they understood about the infection's effects on brain function, but the evidence before her eyes forced her to confront the possibility that their scientific understanding was incomplete. The standoff stretched across several agonizing seconds as the infected creature continued its unnerving observation of the survivor team, its head tilting slightly as if processing information in a way that contradicted everything they believed about the mindless nature of the undead. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air, his crossbow trained on the creature's center mass while his mind raced through possible scenarios and their likely outcomes. The infected stillness was perhaps more terrifying than any aggressive charge would have been, because it suggested a level of cognitive function that transformed their understanding of the threat they faced on a fundamental level. Harrison made a subtle hand gesture, signaling for the team to slowly spread out and create multiple angles of attack should the situation deteriorate into violence. His military training had taught him that when facing an unknown enemy capability, the best strategy was to maintain tactical flexibility while gathering as much intelligence as possible about the threat's behavior and limitations. The infected creature's eyes tracked their movements with an awareness that sent chills down the veteran's spine, confirming his growing suspicion that they were dealing with something far more dangerous than the shambling hordes they had learned to navigate around. Elena found herself studying the creature with the analytical mind of a medical professional, noting details that might provide clues about this apparent evolution in infected behavior. The creature's skin showed the typical discoloration and decay associated with the infection, but its posture and movement suggested that the neurological damage they had assumed was universal might not be as complete as previously believed. Her hands moved instinctively toward her medical bag, not for weapons but for the small notebook where she had been documenting observations about the infection's progression and effects on human physiology. Tommy's breathing had become shallow and rapid as the reality of their situation began to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. The teenager had survived this long by trusting his instincts and maintaining constant motion, but now he found himself frozen in place by an enemy that seemed to be studying him as intently as he was studying it. His grip on his weapon tightened as he fought against the urge to break the stalemate with immediate action, knowing that any sudden movement might trigger a response that could doom them all. The infected creature suddenly turned its head toward the street below, its attention apparently drawn by something the survivors couldn't perceive from their position. This momentary distraction provided Marcus with the opportunity he had been waiting for, and he squeezed the trigger of his crossbow with the smooth precision of someone who had made similar shots countless times before. The bolt flew true, striking the creature in the chest and sending it stumbling backward toward the edge of the rooftop, but instead of falling or collapsing as expected, the infected let out a sound that was unlike anything they had heard before. The cry that emerged from the creature's throat was not the typical moan or growl associated with the infected, but rather a complex vocalization that seemed to carry meaning and purpose. Within seconds, answering calls began to echo from the streets below, and the survivors watched in horror as infected throughout the area began moving with renewed purpose toward their building. The creature on the rooftop, despite the crossbow bolt protruding from its chest, managed to maintain its footing and continued to emit the strange calling sound until Marcus fired a second bolt that finally brought it down. Harrison immediately took charge of the rapidly deteriorating situation, his voice cutting through the team's shock with the authority of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under extreme pressure. The infected below were no longer wandering aimlessly but were instead converging on their position with a coordination that suggested they had been summoned by their fallen comrade's call. The veteran's mind raced through their limited options, weighing the risks of attempting to continue with their original mission against the growing certainty that they were facing a threat far more sophisticated than they had prepared for. Elena grabbed her medical bag and moved toward the rooftop access door, her training telling her that their best chance of survival lay in immediate evacuation rather than attempting to fight their way through what was rapidly becoming a coordinated assault. The sounds from the street below were growing louder and more numerous, suggesting that infected from a wide area were responding to the call they had witnessed. Her medical knowledge provided no framework for understanding how such communication might be possible given the neurological damage associated with the infection, but the evidence before her eyes left no room for doubt about what was happening. Tommy's youth worked in his favor as he quickly adapted to the changing situation, his natural agility allowing him to reach the rooftop access ahead of the others and begin working on the door that would provide their escape route. His hands shook slightly as he manipulated the lock, but his determination to survive overrode his fear and allowed him to focus on the mechanical task at hand. The sounds of infected climbing the building's exterior fire escape were becoming audible, confirming that their position had been compromised and that immediate action was necessary to avoid being trapped. Marcus retrieved his crossbow bolts from the fallen creature, noting with professional interest that the infected's wounds showed signs of clotting that shouldn't have been possible given what they understood about the infection's effects on circulatory function. The creature's blood was darker than normal human blood but hadn't taken on the black, tar-like consistency they had observed in other infected specimens. These details might prove crucial for understanding the evolution they were witnessing, but there was no time for detailed examination as the sounds of approaching infected grew closer and more threatening. The door to the rooftop access finally yielded to Tommy's efforts, revealing a dark stairwell that represented both escape and unknown danger. Harrison took point as they descended into the building's interior, his weapon ready and his senses alert for any signs of infected presence within the structure. The building had been cleared during their initial reconnaissance, but the events of the past few minutes had demonstrated that their assumptions about infected behavior could no longer be trusted, making every shadow and corner a potential threat. The stairwell descended into an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams, creating dancing shadows that played tricks on their already heightened senses as they moved deeper into the building's interior. Harrison's military training kicked in automatically, his movements precise and controlled as he swept each landing for potential threats while the rest of the team followed in tight formation behind him. The sounds of infected scaling the building's exterior had grown more intense, with the scraping of claws against brick and the occasional thud of bodies hitting the walls creating a symphony of pursuit that drove home the urgency of their situation. Elena's medical bag bounced against her back with each hurried step, the familiar weight serving as both comfort and reminder of her responsibility to keep the team alive and functional in the face of whatever horrors awaited them. Her mind continued to process the implications of what they had witnessed on the rooftop, the creature's apparent ability to communicate and coordinate with others representing a paradigm shift that challenged everything the medical community had theorized about the infection's neurological effects. The sound of breaking glass from somewhere above them indicated that their pursuers had reached the rooftop and were likely following their escape route. Tommy's youthful energy served him well as they navigated the treacherous descent, his natural agility allowing him to move quickly while maintaining the silence that had become second nature during their months of survival. The teenager's sharp hearing picked up subtle sounds that the others might have missed, the soft shuffling of feet somewhere in the building's depths, the creak of floorboards under weight that shouldn't have been there, and the almost imperceptible whisper of air movement that suggested they were not alone in the structure they had believed to be secure. Marcus brought up the rear, his crossbow loaded and ready as he periodically glanced back toward the stairwell above them, watching for signs of infected pursuit while trying to process the tactical implications of their enemy's apparent evolution. The creature's ability to communicate and coordinate attacks represented a fundamental change in the nature of their conflict, transforming what had been a war of attrition against mindless predators into something far more complex and dangerous. His experience as a survivor had taught him to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, but this development challenged his understanding of the rules that had kept him alive. The team reached the building's main floor without encountering any infected within the structure, but the sounds from above indicated that their pursuers had successfully entered the building and were following their path downward. Harrison quickly assessed their options, noting that the building's layout provided several potential exit routes but also numerous places where they could be trapped if the infected managed to surround the structure. His tactical mind weighed the advantages of attempting to reach street level against the risks of encountering the coordinated groups they had observed earlier. Elena moved to one of the building's windows and carefully peered through a gap in the boards that had been used to secure the opening, her medical training helping her remain calm as she observed the situation outside. What she saw confirmed their worst fears. Infected were positioned around the building's perimeter in what could only be described as a coordinated siege formation. The creatures weren't simply gathering randomly but were instead positioned to cover all potential exit points, suggesting a level of tactical thinking that should have been impossible given their understanding of the infection's effects. The sound of footsteps in the stairwell above them grew closer, accompanied by the distinctive moaning that had become the soundtrack of their nightmarish existence, but there was something different about these vocalizations. The moans seemed to carry patterns and variations that suggested they might be a form of communication rather than simply the mindless sounds they had always assumed them to be. Tommy pressed himself against the wall near the stairwell entrance, his weapon ready as he prepared to defend their position against whatever emerged from the darkness above. Harrison's military experience told him that they were facing a classic tactical situation, surrounded by an enemy that had demonstrated superior numbers and coordination while occupying a position that offered limited defensive advantages. The veteran's mind raced through potential strategies, weighing the risks of attempting a breakout against the possibility of finding a more defensible position within the building. His years of combat experience had taught him that sometimes the best strategy was to avoid engagement entirely, but their current situation offered few options for disengagement. Marcus noticed movement in the shadows near the building's rear entrance, confirming that the infected had indeed surrounded their position and were likely preparing for a coordinated assault. The creature's behavior continued to defy everything they thought they knew about the infection, with some infected appearing to take up overwatch positions while others moved to block potential escape routes. The tactical sophistication of their enemy's deployment was both impressive and terrifying, suggesting that the infection might be evolving in ways that made the creatures far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Elena's medical knowledge provided no framework for understanding how such complex behavior could emerge from brains that had supposedly been damaged by the infection, but the evidence before her eyes left no room for doubt about what they were witnessing. The creatures outside moved with purpose and coordination that indicated not just intelligence but the ability to plan and execute complex strategies. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her notebook, knowing that documenting these observations might be crucial for other survivors even if they didn't survive to share the information themselves. The first infected appeared at the top of the stairwell, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light filtering down from above, but its presence was unmistakable as it began to descend toward their position. Tommy raised his weapon, his finger hovering over the trigger as he waited for Harrison's signal to engage, knowing that the sound of gunfire would likely trigger a full assault from the creatures surrounding the building. The teenager's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that they were about to face their most challenging battle yet against an enemy that had proven capable of learning and adapting to their tactics. The infected creature descending the stairwell moved with a deliberate caution that was completely at odds with the reckless aggression the survivors had come to expect from the undead, its footsteps measured and purposeful as it navigated the steps with an awareness that suggested it understood the tactical disadvantage of being silhouetted against the dim light from above. Harrison held his breath as he watched the creature's approach, his finger resting lightly on his weapon's trigger while his mind calculated angles of fire and potential collateral damage in the confined space of the building's interior. The veteran's experience told him that engaging the creature now would likely trigger a coordinated response from the infected surrounding the building, but allowing it to reach the main floor would put his team at an even greater disadvantage. Elena pressed herself against the wall beside one of the boarded windows, her medical bag positioned for quick access while her eyes remained fixed on the stairwell where their pursuer continued its methodical descent. The nurse's training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but the systematic nature of the infected's approach was unlike anything she had encountered during their months of survival, suggesting a level of tactical thinking that challenged her understanding of what the creatures were capable of achieving. Her hands moved instinctively to check her medical supplies, knowing that the coming confrontation would likely result in injuries that would test her ability to keep the team functional. Tommy's position near the stairwell entrance gave him the clearest view of their approaching enemy, and what he saw made his blood run cold as he realized that the creature was not alone but was instead being followed by at least 3 other infected who moved with the same deliberate coordination. The teenager's survival instinct screamed at him to open fire immediately, but Harrison's tactical discipline had rubbed off on the young man during their months together, and he maintained his position while waiting for the signal that would unleash their defensive response. His weapon felt heavy in his hands as he fought against the adrenaline that urged him toward immediate action. Marcus had positioned himself to cover the building's rear entrance, his crossbow trained on the shadows where he had detected movement earlier, but the infected outside seemed content to maintain their positions rather than attempting an immediate assault. This restraint was perhaps more unnerving than an aggressive attack would have been, because it suggested that the creatures were capable of patience and strategic thinking that transformed them from mindless predators into calculating hunters. The silence from outside was broken only by the occasional shuffle of feet and the soft moaning that seemed to carry meaning beyond simple vocalization. The lead infected reached the bottom of the stairwell and paused at the threshold between the stairs and the main floor, its head turning slowly as it surveyed the space with an intelligence that was deeply disturbing to witness. Harrison could see the creature's eyes moving systematically across the room, taking in details and assessing threats in a manner that suggested it was gathering tactical intelligence rather than simply responding to immediate stimuli. The veteran's military training had prepared him for many types of enemies, but facing an opponent that could think and plan while possessing the relentless hunger of the infected presented challenges he had never anticipated. Elena noticed that the creature's examination of their position seemed to focus particularly on potential escape routes and defensive positions, confirming her growing suspicion that they were dealing with an enemy that understood tactical concepts and could apply them effectively in combat situations. The medical implications of such cognitive function in infected individuals were staggering, suggesting that the neurological damage caused by the infection might be less complete than previously believed or that the creatures were somehow adapting and recovering lost capabilities. Her scientific mind wanted to study this phenomenon, but her survival instincts reminded her that understanding their enemy would be meaningless if they didn't live to apply that knowledge. The infected creature suddenly raised its head and emitted a low, complex vocalization that was immediately answered by similar sounds from outside the building, confirming that the creatures were indeed communicating and coordinating their actions in real time. Tommy felt his grip tighten on his weapon as he realized that they were not just facing a group of individual threats but rather a coordinated force that could adapt its tactics based on changing circumstances. The teenager's youth had been an advantage in their previous encounters because it allowed him to move quickly and think creatively, but now he found himself facing an enemy that might be capable of anticipating and countering such advantages. Harrison made the tactical decision that had been weighing on his mind since they first encountered the organized infected behavior, raising his weapon and signaling for the team to prepare for immediate engagement rather than allowing their enemies to complete whatever coordination they were attempting. The veteran's experience told him that waiting for the enemy to fully organize their attack would only worsen their already precarious situation, and that their best chance of survival lay in disrupting the infected's plans before they could be fully implemented. His signal was met with immediate response from his team, each member moving to their assigned positions with the fluid coordination that had kept them alive through countless previous encounters. Marcus shifted his position to provide covering fire for the team's planned breakout attempt, his crossbow loaded with one of their precious explosive-tipped bolts that could potentially clear a path through the infected surrounding the building's exits. The survivor's experience had taught him that sometimes the most audacious plans had the best chance of success because they caught enemies off guard, but the organized nature of their current opponents suggested that surprise might be more difficult to achieve than in their previous encounters. His finger found the trigger as he prepared to provide the distraction that would hopefully allow his teammates to reach safety. Elena secured her medical bag and moved toward the building's side exit, her route planned to take advantage of what appeared to be a gap in the infected's perimeter coverage, though she couldn't be certain whether this gap was genuine or simply part of a more sophisticated trap. The nurse's medical training had taught her to think systematically about problems and solutions, but the current situation required her to trust instincts and intuition rather than careful analysis. Her heart pounded as she prepared to sprint across open ground while hoping that their enemy's apparent intelligence hadn't extended to anticipating their escape route. Tommy took a deep breath and prepared to follow Elena's lead, his youthful agility and speed representing their best hope of reaching the federal building despite the coordinated opposition they now faced. The teenager's survival instincts had been honed by months of close calls and narrow escapes, but he had never faced an enemy that seemed capable of learning from previous encounters and adapting its tactics accordingly. His weapon felt reassuring in his hands as he prepared to fight his way through whatever obstacles lay between them and their objective. The moment Harrison gave the signal, the building erupted into chaos as the team executed their desperate breakout plan with the precision born from months of life-or-death situations. Marcus fired his explosive-tipped bolt toward the densest concentration of infected near the front entrance, the resulting blast sending bodies flying and creating a momentary gap in their enemy's coordinated formation. The explosion's thunderous roar echoed through the empty streets, but instead of the random panic they had expected to see among the infected, the creatures responded with an organized tactical adjustment that demonstrated their ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions in real time. Elena sprinted toward the side exit with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move efficiently under extreme pressure, her medical bag secured tightly against her back to prevent any equipment from being lost during their escape attempt. The gap in the infected perimeter that she had identified proved to be genuine rather than a trap, but as she reached the building's exterior, she realized that the creatures had anticipated this possibility and had positioned themselves to funnel escaping humans toward a predetermined kill zone. Her medical training kicked in automatically as she assessed the tactical situation, noting that the infected's positioning suggested they understood concepts of terrain advantage and crossfire that should have been beyond their cognitive capabilities. Tommy followed close behind Elena, his youthful speed allowing him to keep pace with the nurse while maintaining the situational awareness that had kept him alive through countless previous encounters. The teenager's sharp eyes caught movement in the shadows between buildings, confirming that the infected had positioned additional forces to intercept anyone who managed to break through their primary perimeter. His weapon remained ready as he prepared to provide covering fire for Elena while simultaneously watching for threats that might emerge from unexpected directions, knowing that their enemies' demonstrated intelligence made traditional escape routes potentially deadly. Harrison emerged from the building's rear entrance with the controlled aggression of a veteran warrior, his military training allowing him to move efficiently through the urban battlefield while maintaining tactical awareness of his team's positions and the enemy's likely responses. The infected surrounding the building had indeed coordinated their response to the explosion, with some creatures moving to contain the breach while others repositioned to maintain coverage of alternative escape routes. The veteran's experience told him that they were facing an enemy that understood military tactics and could implement them effectively despite their apparent physical limitations. Marcus reloaded his crossbow with practiced efficiency while moving toward his next firing position, his survival instincts telling him that the infected's organized response to their breakout attempt represented a fundamental shift in the nature of their conflict. The creatures no longer simply reacted to human actions but instead seemed capable of anticipating and countering tactical moves with a sophistication that transformed every encounter into a deadly chess match. His experience as a survivor had taught him to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, but the speed with which their enemies were evolving presented challenges that tested the limits of human adaptability. The infected's response to their escape attempt revealed new aspects of their evolved behavior that were both fascinating and terrifying to witness. Instead of the mindless pursuit they had come to expect, the creatures moved with tactical discipline that suggested they understood concepts of unit cohesion and mutual support. Elena noticed that wounded infected were being protected by their uninjured companions, indicating a level of social organization that challenged everything the medical community had theorized about the infection's effects on human behavior and cognition. Tommy's position allowed him to observe the infected's communication methods in greater detail, noting that their vocalization seemed to carry specific tactical information rather than simply expressing hunger or aggression. The teenager's survival instincts had been honed by months of reading enemy behavior patterns, but the complexity of the infected's coordination suggested that they were dealing with an intelligence that could learn and adapt at a rate that might eventually surpass human tactical capabilities. His weapon felt inadequate as he realized that their traditional advantages of superior planning and coordination were being systematically neutralized. Harrison's military experience provided him with a framework for understanding the tactical situation they faced, but the infected's demonstrated capabilities forced him to reconsider fundamental assumptions about asymmetric warfare and enemy capabilities. The creatures had effectively implemented a classic military encirclement strategy while maintaining the flexibility to adapt their positions based on changing circumstances, suggesting that their intelligence extended beyond simple tactical awareness to include strategic thinking and long-term planning. The veteran's training told him that facing such an enemy required a complete reassessment of their operational methods and survival strategies. Elena reached the edge of the infected perimeter and paused to assess the route toward the federal building, her medical knowledge helping her evaluate the physical capabilities of the creatures blocking their path while her survival experience guided her tactical analysis. The infected showed signs of physical deterioration consistent with their previous observations, but their coordination and tactical awareness suggested that cognitive function had not only been preserved but might actually be improving over time. Her scientific mind struggled to reconcile these observations with established medical understanding of neurological damage and recovery. The sound of approaching reinforcements from deeper within the city indicated that the infected's communication network extended far beyond the immediate area, suggesting a level of organization that encompassed multiple groups across a wide geographic region. Marcus adjusted his position to provide overwatch for the team's continued advance, his crossbow trained on the most likely approach routes for enemy reinforcements while his mind processed the implications of facing an enemy that could coordinate operations on such a scale. The survivor's experience had taught him that understanding enemy capabilities was crucial for developing effective countermeasures, but the rapid evolution of infected behavior made such understanding increasingly difficult to achieve. Tommy's youthful adaptability served him well as he quickly adjusted his tactics to account for the infected's demonstrated intelligence, moving with the unpredictable patterns that had served him well in previous encounters while remaining alert for signs that his enemies were learning to anticipate such methods. The teenager's survival instincts told him that their traditional advantages were being systematically neutralized by an enemy that could observe, learn, and adapt at a rate that challenged human superiority in tactical thinking. His weapon remained ready as he prepared to face whatever new challenges their evolved enemies might present during their continued advance toward their objective. The federal building loomed ahead through the morning haze, its imposing concrete facade scarred by months of neglect and the occasional impact from desperate survivors who had attempted to breach its defenses before succumbing to the infected hordes that now ruled the streets. Harrison studied the structure through his cracked binoculars, noting that the infected had established what could only be described as a defensive perimeter around the building, with creatures positioned at strategic points that would allow them to observe and intercept any approach from multiple directions. The veteran's military training told him that such positioning required not just intelligence but also an understanding of defensive tactics that suggested their enemies had evolved far beyond simple predatory behavior. Elena crouched beside an abandoned delivery truck, her medical bag positioned for quick access while she observed the infected's behavior patterns around their target objective. The creatures moved with a purposefulness that was deeply unsettling, some appearing to patrol designated routes while others remained stationary at observation posts that provided overlapping fields of view. Her medical knowledge provided no framework for understanding how such complex organizational behavior could emerge from brains that had supposedly been damaged by the infection, but the evidence before her eyes forced her to confront the possibility that their scientific understanding was fundamentally incomplete. Tommy's sharp eyes caught details that the others might have missed, noting that some of the infected around the federal building appeared to be carrying crude weapons fashioned from debris and scavenged materials. The teenager's survival instincts had been honed by months of observing enemy behavior, but the sight of infected wielding tools represented a cognitive leap that transformed them from dangerous predators into something approaching a military force. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his weapon, realizing that their traditional advantages of superior equipment and tactical thinking were being systematically eroded by an enemy that was learning to match their capabilities. Marcus positioned himself to provide covering fire for the team's approach, his crossbow loaded with another of their precious explosive bolts while his mind raced through potential scenarios and their likely outcomes. The survivor's experience had taught him to read battlefield conditions and adapt his tactics accordingly, but the Infected's demonstrated ability to coordinate defensive operations suggested that they were facing an enemy that could anticipate and counter human tactical methods with increasing effectiveness. His finger rested lightly on the trigger as he prepared to engage targets that might be capable of tactical thinking and coordinated response. The team's approach to the federal building required them to cross several hundred yards of open ground that was covered by the Infected's defensive positions, a challenge that would have been difficult enough against mindless enemies but became exponentially more dangerous when facing opponents capable of coordinated fire and tactical communication. Harrison's military experience provided him with several potential strategies for breaching such defenses, but each option carried significant risks when facing an enemy whose capabilities remained largely unknown and appeared to be evolving in real time. Elena noticed that the Infected's defensive positions showed signs of deliberate construction and improvement over time, with some creatures having used debris and scavenged materials to create crude but effective fortifications that enhanced their natural advantages. The medical implications of such behavior were staggering, suggesting that the infection had not only preserved cognitive function but might actually be enhancing certain aspects of intelligence and problem-solving ability. Her scientific mind wanted to study these developments, but her survival instincts reminded her that understanding their enemy would be meaningless if they didn't survive to apply that knowledge. Tommy's youthful agility would be crucial for their approach strategy, but the teenager realized that his traditional advantages of speed and unpredictability might be less effective against enemies that could observe, learn, and adapt to human movement patterns. The Infected's positioning around the federal building suggested that they understood concepts of interlocking fields of fire and mutual support that would make any direct assault extremely hazardous. His weapon felt inadequate as he contemplated facing enemies that combined the relentless hunger of the Infected with tactical capabilities that approached human military standards. The sound of coordinated movement from the Infected positions confirmed Harrison's assessment that they were facing a defensive network rather than simply a collection of individual threats, with creatures adjusting their positions in response to the team's presence in a manner that suggested real-time tactical communication and coordination. The veteran's experience told him that breaching such defenses would require either overwhelming firepower or tactical innovation that could exploit weaknesses in the enemy's coordination, but their limited resources made the first option impossible while the second required understanding an enemy whose capabilities remained largely mysterious. Marcus observed the Infected's weapon usage with professional interest, noting that while their tools were crude, the creatures wielded them with an effectiveness that suggested they understood basic principles of leverage and impact dynamics. The survivor's experience had taught him that underestimating enemy capabilities was often fatal, but the Infected's demonstrated ability to use tools represented a cognitive development that challenged fundamental assumptions about their nature and limitations. His crossbow remained trained on the most threatening positions while his mind processed the tactical implications of facing tool-using enemies. Elena's medical training helped her recognize signs of organization and hierarchy among the Infected defenders, with some creatures appearing to occupy leadership positions while others followed their directions with a discipline that suggested military-style command structure. The nurse's scientific background provided no explanation for how such complex social organization could emerge from individuals whose brains had supposedly been damaged by infection, but the evidence before her eyes left no room for doubt about what they were witnessing. Her hands moved instinctively to check her medical supplies, knowing that the coming assault would test her ability to keep the team functional under extreme conditions. Tommy's position allowed him to observe the Infected's communication methods in greater detail, noting that their vocalization seemed to carry specific tactical information about the team's position and likely approach routes. The teenager's survival instincts told him that they were facing an enemy that could not only coordinate defensive operations but also adapt their tactics based on real-time intelligence gathering and analysis. His weapon remained ready as he prepared to face whatever challenges their evolved enemies might present during their assault on the federal building. Harrison made the tactical decision that would determine their fate, choosing to attempt a coordinated assault that would rely on speed, surprise, and the team's remaining advantages in equipment and training to overcome the Infected's defensive positions. The veteran's military experience told him that hesitation would only allow their enemies more time to strengthen their defenses and coordinate their response, making immediate action their best chance of success despite the significant risks involved. His signal to advance would commit them to a course of action that would either secure the weapons they desperately needed or result in their destruction at the hands of an enemy that had proven capable of matching human tactical capabilities. The final assault began with Marcus's explosive bolt streaking through the morning air toward the infected's primary defensive position, the projectile's impact sending a shockwave through the creature's carefully constructed fortifications while simultaneously announcing the team's commitment to their desperate gambit. Harrison led the charge across the open ground with the controlled aggression of a veteran warrior, his weapon firing in measured bursts as he advanced toward the federal building's entrance while the infected defenders responded with a coordination that demonstrated their evolution into a true military threat. The veteran's decades of combat experience had prepared him for many types of enemies, but facing opponents that combined the relentless hunger of the infected with tactical capabilities that rivaled human military units represented the ultimate test of his survival skills. Elena sprinted across the battlefield with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move efficiently under extreme pressure, her medical bag secured against her back while her eyes remained alert for wounded teammates who might need immediate attention during the chaos of their assault. The nurse's training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but the infected's organized response to their attack demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that challenged her understanding of what the creatures were capable of achieving. Her route toward the building's side entrance took her through a gauntlet of defensive positions where infected wielding crude but effective weapons attempted to intercept her advance with a coordination that was both impressive and terrifying. Tommy's youthful speed and agility served him well as he darted between cover points during their advance, his weapon providing suppressing fire that helped clear a path for his teammates while his sharp eyes watched for threats that might emerge from unexpected directions. The teenager's survival instincts had been honed by months of close calls and narrow escapes, but the infected's demonstrated ability to adapt their tactics in real time meant that his traditional advantages of unpredictability and creative thinking were being systematically countered by enemies that could learn and respond to human methods. His heart pounded as he realized that they were fighting not just for their immediate survival but for the future of human resistance against an enemy that was rapidly approaching parity with human capabilities. Marcus provided overwatch from his elevated position, his crossbow delivering precise shots that eliminated key threats while his tactical mind processed the implications of what they were witnessing during their assault on the federal building. The infected's defensive response demonstrated not just intelligence and coordination but also the ability to implement complex tactical concepts under pressure, suggesting that their cognitive evolution had reached a point where they could match human military capabilities in many areas. The survivor's experience told him that understanding enemy capabilities was crucial for developing effective countermeasures, but the rapid pace of infected evolution made such understanding increasingly difficult to achieve and apply. The federal building's entrance proved to be more heavily defended than their reconnaissance had suggested, with infected having constructed elaborate barricades and defensive positions that channeled attacking forces into predetermined kill zones where coordinated fire could be brought to bear. Harrison's military training allowed him to recognize the tactical sophistication of these defenses, but his experience also told him that such positions often contained weaknesses that could be exploited by determined attackers willing to accept significant risks. The veteran's assault on the building's main entrance drew the attention of most defenders, creating opportunities for his teammates to approach from alternative directions. Elena reached the building's side entrance and immediately began working on the security systems that had been installed to protect the military cache stored within, her medical training providing her with the steady hands and analytical mind necessary to bypass electronic locks under extreme pressure. The sounds of battle from the main entrance indicated that Harrison was successfully drawing enemy attention, but the infected's demonstrated intelligence suggested that they might recognize the diversion and redirect forces to counter her infiltration attempt. Her fingers worked quickly on the lock mechanism while her ears remained alert for sounds of approaching enemies. Tommy's advance toward the building's rear entrance took him through terrain that had been deliberately modified by the infected to create defensive advantages, with debris and obstacles positioned to slow attacking forces while providing cover for defending creatures. The teenager's agility allowed him to navigate these obstacles more quickly than adult survivors might have managed, but his progress was still slower than their tactical plan had anticipated. His weapon remained ready as he prepared to breach the building's defenses while hoping that his teammates could maintain their diversionary attacks long enough for him to reach his objective. The infected's response to their coordinated assault revealed new aspects of their evolved capabilities that were both fascinating and terrifying to witness, with creatures demonstrating the ability to reallocate defensive resources based on changing tactical priorities while maintaining overall coordination of their defensive network. Marcus observed this reallocation from his overwatch position, noting that the infected's tactical flexibility approached that of well-trained human military units while retaining the relentless determination that made them such formidable opponents. His crossbow continued to provide supporting fire while his mind processed the implications of facing an enemy that could adapt and evolve in real time. Harrison's assault on the main entrance succeeded in breaching the infected's primary defensive line, but the veteran quickly realized that the creatures had prepared fallback positions within the building itself, transforming what should have been a simple infiltration into a complex urban warfare scenario. The infected's defensive preparations demonstrated not just tactical intelligence but also the ability to think strategically about long-term defensive operations, suggesting that their cognitive evolution had reached a point where they could plan and execute complex military operations. His weapon remained ready as he advanced into the building's interior while calling out tactical updates to his teammates. Elena successfully bypassed the building's security systems and gained access to the military cache, but what she found inside challenged her understanding of the infected's capabilities and intentions in ways that would reshape their approach to the ongoing conflict. The weapons and ammunition were exactly where intelligence had suggested they would be, but the cache also contained evidence that other survivor groups had reached this location before them, only to meet fates that suggested the infected had been using the military supplies as bait to lure human resistance fighters into carefully prepared traps. Her medical training told her to document these findings, but her survival instincts urged immediate action to secure the weapons and escape before the infected could complete whatever tactical plan they had been implementing. Tommy reached his assigned position and began providing covering fire for the team's extraction, but the teenager's sharp eyes caught movement that suggested the infected had anticipated their escape route and were positioning forces to intercept them during their withdrawal from the federal building. The creature's tactical sophistication had reached a point where they could not only defend static positions but also conduct complex operations that required coordination between multiple units across extended periods of time. His weapon felt inadequate as he prepared to face enemies that had evolved beyond simple predatory behavior into something approaching a true military force capable of strategic thinking and long-term planning. The team's mission to secure military supplies had succeeded, but their discovery of the infected's true capabilities would force them to completely reassess their understanding of the enemy they faced and develop new strategies for human survival in a world where the undead had evolved into intelligent, coordinated opponents capable of matching human tactical abilities while retaining their relentless hunger and determination to eliminate all human resistance.